It's my privilege to moderate this session, and first I would like to thank warmly to the organizers of the meeting for this invitation. We had four very challenging and stimulating talks this morning, and I think that I can summarize the four talks in two formulas. One is stem cells, what are they? And the other is stem cells, what can they do? And this second formulation is related with the scientific approach and the examples that have been illustrated by the presentations of the two speakers. But at the same time, we have this approach to the ethical concerns by Dr. Helena Pereira de Melo and Dr. Kilish. Is this well pronounced? Thank you. Because these lines are in parallel, and frequently there is the researchers' freedom confronts the principles and values of cultural established societies, and that's the point. Before giving the audience the possibility of addressing questions to these four speakers, I would like to start by provoking them with both. In 2009, I was back into I was browsing in my memories, and the Time magazine published this issue, How to Coming Revolution in Stem Cells Could Save Your Life. It was in 2009. And there was some quotations. One is Dr. David Scadden, co-director at that time of Harvard Stem Cell Institute. And he said, it's a wonderful time for the stem cell field. Keep your seatbelt on, because this ride is going to be wild. So for the two invited speakers of this morning, I would like to invite them to comment as a follow-up 10 years back what was announced by your colleague from Harvard Medical School. So what happened in these 10 years? Because this is a long story of conflicts and breakthroughs. The conflicts are related with the origins of the cells. And for them, the second provocative question is for our members of this ethical legal community. And the question is, the title of this symposium is Stem Cells, Regenerative Medicine, Ethics and Society. And my question is, where is society in this context? Is there a role for the citizens? Should we promote, or should we go towards to promote the public debate in order to have back a perception, a public perception, to better define public policies on this matter? Or this issue is an issue that should be restricted to the community of scholars, of experts and bioethicists? So, two questions for both of you. Thank you.
So I think your question to myself is the wild ride that David Scadden predicted in 2009. And it has been a wild ride. And I think it's due to several features. One of them is, no less than the fact that stem cell research is probing some of the really fundamental issues of life itself and what makes any person or any animal, actually, for that matter, what they are today, and how they evolve, how they develop, and those are actually very opposite sides of the same coin, and how they can be literally reprogrammed. How you can take a fully adult cell and change its biology and its nature and turn it into something that's pluripotent, has full potential. These are such profound changes in biology that it has disrupted a lot of what we commonly think of, and those of us who are in medicine, what we learned in medical school. So it's a true revolution, and it's not surprising that it has this wild ride associated. And it's not only caused ripples in ethics and issues of society, but it's also, as many of you probably know, it's created its own set of controversies about the science itself. There have been frauds, there have been very well publicized claims that turned out not to be true. There have even been scientists who've committed suicide as a result of the shame associated with that. It's been a really wide ride in a way that I think David Scadden couldn't even realize when he made that statement in 2009.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, the last 10 years, we've seen amazing progress. I mean, there's technological progress. We didn't have gene editing tool, which is so precise, which has come up and has opened up huge opportunities to get fundamental knowledge, understanding of how things work. So we should actually, embrace that, because these are tools which are useful. Also, the advances lead to many ethical challenges, obviously, because should we do germline gene editing or not? What happens if you think that you have a heritable monogenic disease which can be treated, would you not use that? I mean, these are questions that the society needs to address. But I think I wanted to take you up on the last question you asked, which is, should the society be involved? I think that clearly, the society has to be involved. I can cite the example of the UK, where we have a system where recently there was this debate about three-parent baby to treat patients with mitochondrial disease. Now, there's quite a long debate that involved basic research scientists and ethicists and so on. In the end, the decision was made by Parliament, representing all of the people in the United Kingdom. I think that's a good way to go, because all the arguments, everything was transparent, and these issues, whether biological, ethical, technological, everything was debated, and in the end the decision was made that at least in the UK, you can proceed making this three-parent babies to address mitochondrial disease. I think, obviously, we're going to face more and more challenges. Science is advancing very fast. We're going to get potentially, artificial gametes and so on. These are opportunities as well as threats. And the question is having a sensible debate and to see what we can use to ameliorate some of the human diseases.
So the Parliament is better informed in case a public debate proceeds.
The Parliament is informed, the Parliament representing the people is informed, and there are discussions within Parliament, within subcommittees and so on. So this is a very intensive, I think it took about 2 years, maybe more. So it wasn't done in a hurry, but the decision was made that everybody was aware of, and the reasons why there was acceptance that this should proceed. So I think that to me, is a very good model, and it follows on from Human Fertilization and Embryology Act, which was enacted when the first test tube baby was born. And that's a model I think has worked quite well and has been adopted by many other countries.
I think that model works well for the UK, but I wouldn't trust Congress in the US to do similar things.
I'm sorry to hear that, yes.
Yes, maybe. I think it's very important that I think that the policy for bioethical issues is not only a matter of politicians or parliaments. So we need more opportunities for the citizens to participate on this social discourse. But on the other side, we cannot make the law for special research topics through public debate. So it is, depends on the context and political groups and so on. But we need more communication between the scientists and lay people in this context and understandable information and so on. I think the state is responsible for these issues. And on the other side, we can also not reduce these policy issues or law-making process on the parliament working, because we have so many, for example, migrants in Germany, about 7 billion people. They are not German citizens, and therefore in the democratic process, they didn't take enough important expectation, and therefore we should need also the participation opportunities. My persons, I think, maybe a good example, I'm a member of German Ethics Council, and as a non-German citizen, and I participate on these discourse and give some opportunities from the Muslim perspective and so on. But we need more opportunities like this in the multicultural societies, I think.
Can I just add, I think when I said Parliament made a decision in the end, it wasn't just the politicians deciding. I mean, they were informed by the bioethicists and by the scientists. So the decision was made based on information they had gathered from different sources. So it wasn't the politicians suddenly deciding what should happen.
Yes, thank you. I think it is a problem not of the scholars, but of the society, and of the society thought as an enlarged society, and we have biopolitics, considering all citizens on planet Earth, since we have no frontiers when we are speaking about biotechnology, and I could give you 2 examples. The first example, consider a person who has received the pancreas pig cells and who suffers from pig's influenza, and we already have humans suffering from pig's influenza, that lives here in Lisbon and goes to Italy. He may cause a pandemic, and we have to be able to follow him. Or consider the announcement that was made by CloneAid in the beginning of the 20th century that they had already cloned a human being, Eva. If we have cloning in a certain part of the planet, we have to know what is being done so that we will be able at least to know that we have cloned citizens. So it is important to have a different approach, an approach that is global when we consider space and when we consider time, because we are speaking about actions that will have consequences not only in us, but will have actions in people who are going to be born in 1 million years. And if we have a genetic error, they will have to live with it. And so we have to have a different approach to these issues. And an example is UNESCO and the Universal Declarations of UNESCO on bioethics and on human genome and human rights that try to apply to a global citizen, to a new way of thinking citizenship that is no longer linked with sovereignty, with state frontiers, but is linked with humanity. And humanity is thought as a new legal subject in international law, and future generations are considered to be a new part of this new legal subject, and we have to move into a different approach in an ethical and legal, and we have to build bridges so that we can find what is good for the human animal, that we do not know how it will be, we do not know if it will exist, since from the climate point of view, they say that in 30, 40 years, humanity will no longer exist, but if it exists, and we hope that it will exist, we have to create basic rights for everyone without huge inequalities in what concerns access to technology, because we already have them, and we will have north-south inequalities very serious in what concerns gene therapy and so on, and stem cell research, so that we will create a better world for everyone.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open this discussion to the audience. Please raise your hand and say your name and a very brief introduction and the question, a very precise question, please. Oh, sorry. Should I repeat? No. Okay. Okay, please. Microphone. It's not working.
I can just speak loud. So I'm a master's student in stem cell research, and my question was mostly about this type of panels and how truly beneficial it is to include society in these types of conversations, because when you present information, it's just a snapshot of what is years of research and years of knowledge that scientists have. And they give this presentation of 30 minutes, which is great, but it's very complicated to really have the full information. And so when you include society based on these little pieces of information, it becomes quite dangerous when you start asking them, what should we do about this? And since society is bigger than the scholar community, then you start getting misinformed decisions. And so I wanted to ask to the bioethicists mostly, how do you deal with this type of problems when you want to ask society for things, but you cannot fully educate them because it's just impossible to get to that point? That's my question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with you. It's not easy communication between experts and lay people, but I can imagine that maybe we can need a professional interpreter between the lay people and the scientists. And on the other side, we cannot forget that the research was normally funded by students of a country, and therefore I think they have the right to know what is the financial support in these ways. And another way, I think it's very important to accept of results of this research if they take the very simple information about this topic. And it is mainly, for example, in the special situations. It's not, I think, good example for stem cell research, but if you use, for example, insulin for diabetics and so on, and what's the real origin of did they use the pigs and so on, and therefore I think it's also important not only to know what goes on in the science, but also acceptance of the results of research. Is this communication important? And if we want this communication and transparency, we can find, I think, many ways to do this.
Okay,
May I?
questions?
Can I?
Oh.
The question that you are raising is quite interesting in the sense that communication in science is an art, and you have to educate people to know how to communicate what science is doing in a way that the population will understand. But you also have to have in mind that if a citizen is able to vote, a citizen is able to understand what is being done, and is able to choose what is the best solution for each society at each moment. And so the first thing is that you have to be clear, and usually when scholars are not clear, it means that they did not understand what they are saying. And another thing is that you have to know that in certain issues there is no possible consensus. There is no possible consensus in embryonic stem cell research, there is no possible consensus in euthanasia, and so on. So you have to have in mind that at a certain moment you are going to have the people participating, either voting, either by other ways of democratic participation. You are going to reach a solution, a bioethical or a legal solution, and you will know that that solution will be good for 3, 4, 5 years. And afterwards, you will have to see what were the consequences of the law that you have adopted. You have to see if the consequences are really what the population wanted or want at 5 years later, because time here is different. Time in science moves faster than time moves in philosophy, for instance. And you have to begin it again. So it's a process. And all you have to do is to know the main values and to transmit them in a clear way so that people will be able to decide. But you have to trust that citizens are able to understand and to know what is the best for them and for their children and grandchildren.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Soares. I'm an economist. It's been a very insightful discussion. The basis for ethics is moral values. The moral values are, whose moral values are we talking about? Most of the science is done in the West. There are no Muslims, very few Muslims do the science we talk about. But the population for whom this would apply to will not be the West. So my question is, whose moral values and ethical values are we talking about when we talk about this particular topic?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your last sentences. Can you repeat it, please?
The last part was, all the science is being done in the West, and the question is, whose moral values is the basis for the application to society? Because society that will benefit from this research will not be necessarily in the West.
You are absolutely right. We need moral values also for research. But on the other side, I think from the ethical perspective, I think it's a dangerous situation that if we make only the, I would say, positive results of research the moral basic for our research projects in the laboratory and natural sciences, and therefore we should evaluate, I think, some research forms in the context of the moral values. And I would not say in every context we have the East and West in the moral context. We have the basic moral values. They are multi also in the West and East, but on the micro level, the interpretation of these points, for example, the medical futility or the positive results of research and so on, I can imagine that it's not in every context the same. And also, if we discuss about the brain death, for example, so there are not the similar moral values, and therefore we have to evaluate the results of these research topics.
May I?
Thank you.
May I? May I? Yes. We do not have one bioethics. We have many bioethics. We have an European bioethics. We have an African bioethics. Even we have a United States bioethics. If we consider bioethics in Europe, dignity is the main value. If you consider the United States of America, probably autonomy. And if you consider Africa, you will find out that it's more important the group than the individual. And so it's more important, for instance, to protect the group when you're speaking about clinical trials than to protect the individual. If you move to Asia, you have a different bioethics. Bioethics is influenced by religion. For instance, when Dolly was born, a religious group who believed in reincarnation asked what Dolly had done in the previous life that had caused her birth as a clone. So, yeah, but if you were from the Catholic point of view, you would consider that that would be against God's will. So you do not have one bioethics. What you have is a dialogue. What you have, as has been said, are main open values. and you try to reach a consensus, usually at the level of UNESCO, about main valuables, main principles, very open, very flexible, usually soft law, not hard law, because if you move to hard law, half of the world will say no, we are not interested. Symbolic, and then we try to, case by case, find the best solution. But the best solution in a country is not the best solution in the other country, as we can see in stem cell research. So the most important thing here is to find or to have the conscience, to reach the conscience that we are all humans, that we may live in different places, but we have to make an effort to find agreements, at least for a certain moment of time only, in what concerns the most important decisions that may endanger our species. The rest, we have to create spaces of liberty and to know that they exist and that it's good that they exist, because it would be terribly horrible if globalization entered bioethics and we would only have one bioethics, for instance, the American bioethics with Bush and Childress and everyone following the bioethics principology from George Washington University. I think that would be terrible.
Thank you, thank you. Before allowing the two other questions, I would like to move a little bit to the science side of this symposium. It's just for my neighbor. You mentioned that the brain organoids help us to discover what makes us humans. Do you think this model is adequate to investigate how intelligence works, how mental activity is graphed in brain, how consciousness is acquired, creativity and other high-level functions of the brain?
Well, that's an easy one. Those are some of the most challenging issues to deal with in terms of higher cognitive function, and that is part of what makes humans unique, but it's going to be extremely difficult to study that in a dish. There are approaches to studying people that might be able to answer that question. People are advancing imaging technologies, in vivo imaging, so you can actually look at the activity in a brain while somebody's behaving in different ways. Those kinds of studies might give us some insights, but I don't see it happening through stem cell research, because the level at which we're looking at human-specific gene differences is just too fundamental to get at those higher cognitive function questions.
Thank you. Professor Fragata?
Joseph Fragata from Lisbon. I'm a cardiac surgeon. This is one of the situations I said this morning that we open different Pandora boxes and we never know what's going to come out of them. But this is one of the situations in which the final ending, probably if in good use, will justify all the means. And no one will deny that if we are able to manipulate the genome and create a human heart inside a pig, and using that heart for transplantation, as you well know, we are not too far from that, because all the other ways of xenotransplantation have failed. No one would deny that if we can do that, if we can prevent cystic fibrosis or other inherited diseases, this is a very good ending. What we may question is when research gets reverted and we end about cloning people. So I think it's basically more a matter of regulation and, very, very uniform regulation, because as you say, ethics or bioethics will differ according to local beliefs, but the core values of life will keep being the same, keeping the same. One thing you tackled in your story is, and I was commenting with my rector, was about fertility in medicine. And of course, despite the fact you would like to keep that child alive or not, medicine only makes sense if it's not fertile. So, you know, basically, it's a matter how you can convince the families about them, because I've been through that situation, and even in the UK, court normally stands by the parents, if they, you know, by the doctors, if they want to interrupt life support. So I think basically this is globally an issue of keeping our core human values, which safeguard life and well-being, and having a stronger regulation that will prevent us from departure from the course of good. As you say in your beautiful presentation, there is an evolution for humanity, and I don't think by the fear of opening this Pandora box, we should prevent or deny research being conducted.
Thank you. I think it's a good argument to advocate that this discussion should be open to all society and not only for the so-called bioethicists. Please.
Maybe just a short comment. I'm sorry. So I think there are some difference of character of conflicts. If I compare with medical fertility at the end of life, so as you know, we need two important points in medical ethics. One of them is medical indication. So the question is, do we have in this case medical indication? So we can discuss. I know also in for physicians, they are not so clear parameters. There are some parameters, but I can imagine that for someone is the 1% to life is an incidence or a parameter for medical fertility. For others, is a 10%. But in the manipulation of genome, the situation is, I think, from the ethical perspective, is another character. So at first, we cannot, especially in germline research, we cannot speak with people who influence from this editing. So, and then the second point is we have to wait 100 or 200 years to see the results. And therefore, it's more complex than the end-of-life decisions. And therefore, our ethical discourse must consider this complexity in the ethical issues.
Thank you. A little mic.
Here? It's me?
Ah, okay.
Okay. Thank you. My name is João Lavinha. I am a human geneticist here in Lisbon. I would like to ask our biomedical colleagues in the panel something about the feasibility of human enhancement that our philosophical colleague brought to the conversation. Given that even the simplest trait is determined or conditioned by a huge number of determinant of factors. Some of them are genetic, some are not, some are epigenetic or environmental by large. For instance, spermatogenesis, for instance, that you mentioned, is maybe controlled by hundreds of genes, let alone other factors, other environmental factors, and let alone also behavioral traits or intelligence or something like that. So do you think it would be in a foreseeable future that is relevant for the present mankind, human enhancement to choose to select for specific phenotypes feasible? And if so, would there be a consensus regarding human perfectibility to guide us towards this enhancement? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this raises some very important questions. I think some of the answers will come from this afternoon when Janet Rossen will be giving her talk. But I think I was trying to present a kind of an in vitro model towards the end, which is just testing some ideas in culture. I know that this won't give all of the answers, but we need to see, first of all, whether the technique is safe and what the outcomes are. So I think we're a long way from that, in my opinion. So we need to find ways, and also I think it's important that we have model organisms which you can test some of these in. If you want to test some of these ideas in live organisms, including primates. So those are kind of essential steps before I think we can think about applications in humans. So, but at the same time, the technology is also moving forward, and it's moving quite fast. So I think it gets better, but there are still lots of steps before we can proceed. You say, I agree with you. I think individual genes don't act on by themselves. It's a cumulative effect of other genes and the environment, and that's very difficult to assess. But I should also go back and remind you that at the time when test tube babies were on the horizon, there was a huge debate, and there were lots of people who were against it on the same argument, saying, we won't know for 200-300 years. Maybe that still is the case, but you have to use your judgment and common sense, and then the society decides whether it's something that should be adapted as a technology. Now we have more than 6 million test tube babies, and we'll see what happens.
Well, I think the question about enhancement and some of these traits being polygenic is a very interesting one, but I think if you look at evolution, what's happened in, say, the last 6 million years when humans and chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor has mostly been regulatory elements in the genome that have changed. And those are master regulators that actually coordinate the function of tens, 20s, hundreds maybe of genes. And so those elements can be manipulated as well. And I think you could create a kind of enhancements that people are worried about. Maybe not now, but in the not too distant future. So I think those really are concerning.
Yes, please. Microphone.
Thank you so much. Mohammed Ghali, Professor of Islamic Ethics and Biomedical Sciences from Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. As business as usual, with great pleasure, I've been listening to Dr. Griegstein, Dr. Sorani, and of course the other two speakers as well. Based on what I heard from Dr. Griegstein and Sorani, and please correct me because there is a scientific basis which has moral impact. So if the science is wrong, then the moral implications will be wrong as well. It seems that with iPSC technologies, organoids, and all this stuff, that we have now the ability, sometimes theoretically, sometimes it's even practiced in animals, that we can reprogram the soma, the adult cells, to make them function like the germline. To the extent that, if I didn't get it wrong, that we can make a gamete. So we return back the skin cell or the blood cell, we reprogram it, we let it take a time machine back in history to become as it was in the very beginning. If this is true, my understanding, and I see you are all struggling to say that, look, what we get now is not actually the same like the embryo. It does not work. These cells like what the brain works, etc. I think these are interesting questions, but I think there is another very interesting question which will make us rethink the level of dignity we assign to embryo in comparison with the level of dignity we assign to adult cells. because usually so far, within religious bioethics or secular bioethics, we think that embryo has a higher level of dignity. If we don't agree that it's a human being, then it's at least potential human being for different reasons. But it seems this potentiality is existing also in the adult cells, because these adult cells, with some human intervention and technology, we can revert it back to work like the embryo. So I think the work you have been doing makes us as ethicists rethink the whole moral status of our bodies, whether at the embryonic level or even at the adult cell level. I hope the coming days in the thinking group that we can think further about this, but I think we are at the front now of having new discussions, of revisiting our understanding of what do we mean by the special status of the embryo. Thank you so much.
Any other question there, please?
Just
Please, a very
yes,
brief
quick
question.
Quick question is just an ethical question. My question was, you mentioned that 97% is similarity between humans and primates. And I wanted to know, then why are we willing to test on those animals and on those primates? And do we not know that they have any feelings and emotions, and do they not feel pain the way that we do, since we have this much similarity between the two of us? How far are we willing to go to sacrifice our morality and our humanity for the improvement of our species? Thank you.
Well, your question has something in common with the question the professor has raised. And the main idea that we have to have is that we have human dignity, and we have the dignity of the human person. And human dignity, you might find it in biological material that is not linked with the human body. And the dignity of the human person, if you define what a human person is linked with a human body as far as we understand it. And it is a quality. Either you have it, either you do not have it. And according to almost all our, at least our Western, at least the bioethics main currents that you have in Europe, the only animal that has human dignity as a quality that allows him to be a legal subject is the animal that belongs to the human species. And this is why we do not allow certain types of clinical trials with human animals, but we allow it with another great apes. And this idea that now is being questioned, namely because of the results of the Human Genome Project, that show that we have much in common with them from a genetic point of view. And it is an idea that was influenced by our Judeo-Christian past, that is the basis of our ancient Roman law and afterwards, is an idea that now is being challenged. And so we are discussing, should we recognize legal personality to other animals that are not human animals? And we have to have higher protection when we are speaking about clinical trials with animals that are very close to us. And so you have many conventions, namely in Council of Europe, that tell you that you cannot do a certain type of clinical trials with other big apes. But then, and that limits very much what we can do with them. Namely, when you have the car industry used to study what would be the damage caused to the human body when it crashed against the wall, using a big ape. Okay. Nowadays, you cannot do it. But the solution leads to other situations. For instance, you cannot buy genetic material or cell genetic material, gametes, that come from a woman or come from a man, because they have human dignity. But you can buy or sell eggs that come from another big ape. And then, as we heard this morning, sometimes it's easier to make an experiment with women's eggs that you do not buy yourself, but are donated, than with eggs from big apes.
Okay.
So you can, at this moment, we have to rethink our legal system, having in mind
Can you conclude,
what we
please?
have that is new.
Can you conclude?
Concluded.
Excuse me, but I already received the information that we have to finish this session. Before doing that, I'd like to thank very much all our speakers of this morning session for the lively discussion with the audience, to thank as well to the audience. I think we help to build up a bridge already existing and to strengthen between Nova and Aga Khan University. Thank you.